When can we expect to see new entry-level contract signings Sam Hentges and Vladislav Firstov? Plus, when might the Wild be able to get Calen Addison, Adam Beckman, and Marco Rossi to the NHL level? We find out all of that and more today on Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. And just as a reminder, Locked on Wild is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we talk prospects with prospect expert and resident sicko Spoke Z. We touch on the entry-level contracts for Sam Hentges and Vladislav Firstov. We'll talk some organizational depth as well as a look at whether or not the Wild may sign Ben Meyers. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked on Wild, your veteran captain of the show with well over a decade's worth of experience covering your favorite Minnesota sports teams through the highs and the lows. And we're joined by the host of Judd's Buds as part of the Soda Pod feed. And as I mentioned, resident sicko, Spoke Z. Spoked, glad to have you back on the show. And we've seen the Wild go into full goon mode here since the trade deadline. They are off and rolling. So it's an exciting time here for the Minnesota Wild, not only there, but in the prospect realm as well. Let's start with an interesting kind of nugget because we've got the Frozen Four going on coming up. And so a lot of collegiate athletes starting to look for their next steps. And a couple of players have signed entry-level contracts with the Wild already, but there is a certain golden gopher in Ben Meyers who is drawing a lot of interest. What do you think of Ben Meyers, and do the Wilds have a legit chance to sign him?
First of all, thank you for having me. Been a minute since we last spoke. Ben Meyers, I mean, he's that dude. It sounds like there's a very good chance that he ends up in Minnesota per Russo and whoever his sources are. The Wild are now one of two front runners to land Ben Meyers. And, the one thing they have in their back pocket is the Minnesota connection, obviously. But this kid he's unbelievable. He's right around there. Like, he's right around ready to get like a test drive in the NHL. So if they were to sign him, I would expect that they'd bring him in and just get a look at him. But he just does a little bit of everything for you. He can move. He can score in different ways. He's got a really good shot, whether he's in tight or distance. Most of his goals are coming from in tight. Sick hands. He does a little bit of everything for you. And on top of that, he's defensively pretty solid. I think he's got, I know everyone was all jacked up, mostly just because it was news about Jack McBain. As much as I love the guy, and I think he's just about NHL ready, I think Ben Meyers probably has a higher ceiling, at least offensively, than a Jack McBain does. Obviously, he doesn't have the same size, I guess, but Jack McBain, he was a kid that had first round looks when he was being drafted, got injured, and then kind of fell off his draft year and ended up going in, third round? And until this season, he had been pretty underwhelming at Boston College. He was behind a pretty stacked cast of characters there, but he made this year count, and obviously that stands out to everybody. But I do think Ben Meyers gives you a little bit more dynamic offense than a Jack McBain does, albeit at the same time, McBain definitely does a lot of things that translate well to the NHL. So, Ben Meyers would definitely be a good add. You can never have too many prospects. At the end of the day, if nothing else, you have a pretty good asset on your hands. So, you never know how many of these prospects are going to end up actually playing for your team, but you can never have too many. And, trying to fit them into the lineup, it's a pretty good problem to have.
Do you think we'll see any more steam, and obviously can't really know until we have the news broken. But do you think the Wild will take a look at any other, or should take a look at any other potential collegiate free agents?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you've got a pretty good pool right now of young players that probably can play in the NHL today, but just with contracts and how many guys are in front of them and how many spots there aren't available at this point. It's pretty rare for teams to go out and sign multiple big name college free agents. So I think if you land Ben Meyers, it's probably the one guy that I would say is a good chance ends up in Minnesota. And other than that, I'd be pretty surprised if they went shopping anywhere else. A bunch of those other guys are already signed as well. The Bruins went out and signed Mark McLaughlin from BC. He and Ben Meyers, I watched at Bruins development camp last summer, and they were two of the best players there. Like, it wasn't even close. But a lot of those other guys, like Trevino's probably going to end up in New York if he isn't there already. There's some other guys who I think are juniors that I saw at that development camp that I really like, and I'm sure that they will end up in the NHL. But in terms of Minnesota, I don't think, outside of Ben Meyers, I don't really know how long that shopping list is going to be.
Yeah, it certainly seems like the seating in the metaphorical restaurant for the Wild's organizational depth is starting to really fill up. And so, there are going to be situations like with Jack McBain where you have a guy who says, I don't really see a way up the ladder as quickly as I'd like. So yeah, I think you're right on with, they have some spots to fill, but at the end of the day, this is probably as deep and as good as the Wild prospect pool has been for quite a while.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, they have depth almost everywhere except for like right wing. And even then you got a couple of guys who are, when you're literally just saying, yeah, they could use some more depth at right wing, and you're talking about a prospect pool for a team that's just opening a Stanley Cup window, it's a pretty good spot to be in.
Yeah, 100%. We'll take a look at the overall depth of the organization to end the show today, but we do want to dive in as well to a couple of ELCs that the Wild signed here within the last couple of weeks. So we'll continue our chat with Spoked Z on today's episode of Locked on Wilds after this. With HelloFresh, you get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. You can skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. You can get farm fresh, seasonal produce and easy-to-make recipes delivered right to your door each and every week. And it's all about convenience with HelloFresh. Not only do the ingredients come pre-portioned so you're not overbuying or wasting food, but it's easier than ever to get filling meals on the table in a snap with options like family-friendly or quick and easy recipes. HelloFresh has fit and wholesome recipes for satisfying and nutritious meals that you can feel good about, with 6 recipes per week to choose from, including low-calorie and carb-conscious options. So go to HelloFresh.com/LockedOn16 and use code LockedOn16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. Again, go to HelloFresh.com/LockedOn16 and use the code LockedOn16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. All of this at HelloFresh. April has begun, and we are not fooling. Built Bar is here to help you eat better and look better. And if you're looking for a little bit of a change of pace to your normal Built Bar routine, if you haven't tried Puffs, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite with some incredible flavors: yummy cinnamony churro, chocolate, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie, all amazingly delicious. They are all going to be your new favorite. So head to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off of your order. Again, use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Continuing today's episode of Locked on Wild, again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. Just a reminder, Locked on Wild is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. Your next listen each and every day, each and every week, should be the newest episode of Judd's Buds on the SodaPod feed. So make sure to find that, subscribe, listen. You can even give a 5-star review on Spotify now. So do that. Do that, Locked on Wild listeners, and keep the Minnesota Wild podcast family going strong. Spoke, as mentioned, Sam Hentges and Vladdy Firstov both signing ELCs for the Wild here between now and I think it happened sometime after the trade deadline. So let's just look at the timetable for both guys, what to expect from them here over the next couple of seasons. Let's start with Sam Hentges, who was part of Team USA in the Olympics, came back to St. Cloud State, and a player who has played well when he's played, but he has had some injury bad luck as well. What do you expect the timetable to be for Hentges now that he has signed his ELC, and what can Iowa Wild fans look for in his game? I'm assuming he's going to be reporting there first off.
Yeah. Well, first off, yeah, Sam Hentges, it's funny coming into the year. Obviously I've seen him play plenty of times. I'm not sure if there's one thing that really sticks out with his game, but he does a lot of things really well. I don't know if I'd necessarily label him as like a jack of all trades, master of none type, but for him, the thing that sticks out is he just produces. It's like sometimes you watch a kid and you're like, I don't really know what it is that he does better than anything else, but you put him around the right players and he has a knack to find the net. And I mean, there are a few times this season that he was just, when he came back healthy, he was just taking over games for St. Cloud, who's one of the best teams in the country. Obviously gets that Olympic look and plays well there in his limited minutes, but I think for him, anytime you sign a kid to an ELC or, bringing in a college free agent, whatever it is, between the age and where they're at and how much production there or how much development there is to be had still. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a couple games as a test drive. I got to look at how many contracts they can bring on, but because it's stupid CBA, there's just so many rules that they just make incredibly complicated for like regular people to go and look at. But he plays super hard. He plays with an edge. I think one of the last games he got I think he ended up with like 15 pins. He got tossed for boarding someone from behind. But it's just, again, it's not like you watch him and he's doing anything crazy to stand out. He has good hands. He's skilled. He can move. Again, he's not the most talented kid in the world, but he just makes it work, and I think there's always value to be had there when, you just have a guy that for whatever reason, whatever works for him, it works. So, one thing I noticed more than anything this year is that shot. He was rifling a few pucks. He had a couple of real nice goals. His release is solid. He can score from distance. He can score from in tight. So look at a kid that's able to score. He's more than capable of playing with really good players. And he has a knack to rise up at big moments. So maybe he gets a couple games this year in Minnesota just to see what he's got. But I'm assuming once he's back down in Iowa, he'll feature in that top or middle six. And we'll see who he ends up with. The Iowa Wild are kind of a mess right now. It's not looking good. Playoffs are not looking likely. They're not mathematically out yet. They pretty much have to win out. And they've been playing very poorly. That being said, they look like a team. I mean, Tim Harmey is not an easy guy to play for. He's very demanding. The way he wants his teams to play, it's tough. So you're watching them now, and it looks like they got a lot of guys that are just run down and exhausted. So I think adding guys like Hentges or Firstov, throwing some fresh blood in there, I think that could help them a lot. So I think he'll probably end up on the wing there. But whether it's at center or whether it's at wing, I think he could at least give him a little bit of juice. And if nothing else, he's a competitive bastard. So, it tends to bode well for Tim Army's teams. And there are a couple guys I think he could fit in well with down there.
Well, they could be worn out too from all the fighting, because are they not like leading the AHL in penalty minutes, or are they close to? Because it seems like every time I see highlights from you or from anybody else watching the game, it seems like they're fighting.
Yeah, you know what? I do believe they do lead the league in PIMs, but not that most of them aren't even fights. A lot like they've been incredibly undisciplined, especially lately. But I think like there are a few guys who have 2 or 3 misconducts for abuse of officials. Like they're a rowdy bunch down there. Like they get pretty crazy. So it's not even fighting all the time that is what's racking up the PIMs. It's a lot of like really stupid stuff, which is like kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
Calen Addison has like 5 misconducts.
Oh,
And I think
geez.
one of them's a fight. He gets a lot of unsportsmanlike. He's got a short wick, and when he snaps. So people need to pump the brakes if you're going to talk about how big he is, because he plays like he's 6'5". He's a beast, but yeah, down there's a lot of PIMs, but not necessarily from all fights or anything like that. It's a lot of undisciplined, dumb penalties. Whether it's like I actually am shocked how many times I look at the game notes and there's abusive official. I think Cramarosa has 3. I think he's been
Jeez.
called for 3 different abusive officials, like 10-minute misconducts. Like it's crazy. So they rack up the PIMs down there, and then on top of that, they're just not killing the penalties. So that's really hurting them. But I think it's flaring up a lot more now, just because they just do look exhausted.
Yeah.
There's just no energy, and I mean it's hard to blame them. The AHL season's hard as it is, but on top of that, when you're playing for a guy like Tim Army, who's a great coach, he's just extremely demanding and demands his players play a certain way, and if you don't, then you don't play. So they get themselves into a lot of trouble. But again, I think adding fresh blood, I think it could be good for them.
You mentioned Firstov, and I'm just because of my affinity for Vlad Guerrero Jr., I'm just gonna call him Vladdy. It feels like it fits. Similar story with Firstov. You did kind of allude to it, but again, what does he bring to the table, and what can fans expect from him here over the next couple of years?
A lot of offense. He's a scorer for sure. He's got a wicked shot. He scores from deep. He's got some sneaky skill. Most of his goals are coming from pretty far out, but I think he scored a goal in every Hockey East playoff game. I think all 3 were tip-ins. So he's a crafty player in the offensive zone. He loves having the puck on his stick. He's a winger that kind of plays like a center. He's very creative. Hockey IQ in terms of the offensive zone anyways is very high. He makes a lot of really good plays. Loves having the puck on his stick. And his passing is this year, I noticed especially, he's firing some like those passes that you don't really see, but somehow, he's able to just spot the lane and spot an open guy in front of the net. And I think he was robbed of about 10 assists. I know a lot of people looking at his production and kind of wondering what was going on. UConn's not necessarily a super high scoring team in the first place, and they're playing in Hockey East, where a lot of times they're underdogs, even though they went to the final this year. But he's a really creative player, and he's another kid that plays with an edge. Like he plays hard, and every once in a while he'll snap too. I've probably watched him. I don't even know how he didn't get called for these penalties, but I mean he is whacking guys in front of that net, throwing these cross checks. Like he's battling for every puck. And the thing, he's made his AHL debut, and I thought he looked great. Not just creative in the offensive zone, but forechecking hard, winning battles along the wall, knocking pucks loose. Battle level was super high. He looked like he was pretty jacked up just playing his first pro game, but he offers a lot. There's a reason he was a 2nd-round pick, and there's a reason that a couple of years ago he made that Russian World Juniors team. He's legit, and I think he's definitely kind of gone under the radar with guys like Rossi, Boldy, Beckman, Addison, Wallstedt. Like I think he's kind of slipped under the radar a little bit, but it's a really good prospect, and a really exciting player to watch for sure.
Well, and we've seen from Bill Guerin, it's been pretty evident, and from Dean Evison too. Even if you're a guy that doesn't necessarily have as good of a skill set as some other prospect in the system, if you play hard, if you grind, there's going to be a spot in this roster as long as both Dean and Guerin are running the show.
Yeah, and again, he does play super hard. He definitely has to have. He's definitely going to require, if he's going to play in Minnesota anyways, he's going to have to get a little bit more responsible on the defensive side of the puck, but I thought the effort was there for sure in the defensive zone where, in previous years when he's a young kid in college, he doesn't care about defense, but I thought this year, especially right around Thanksgiving, I remember because I went to a ULOL game because he was playing. So I got to go to that one. And he had a terrible game. I don't even know if he skated in the defensive zone at all. He wasn't on the puck. He was just bad. Gets scratched the next game. Game after that, though, he comes back. They throw him on the fourth line, and he is grinding. And he's defending well. He earns himself an assist. And he was all over the place. So, he's not going to pout when things don't go his way. He responds pretty well to adversity, but again, he definitely needs to work on the defensive side of the puck a little bit more, but the effort's definitely there, which is definitely encouraging to see.
Let's flip and talk about the depth of the organization, because those that have been covering the Wild prospect system for a while know the depth that exists. The national media, it seems like, is starting to kind of take notice as well. And so we'll finish today's episode by taking a look at which positions in the Wild farm system have the most depth. We'll continue our chat with Spoked Z after this here on Locked On Wild. After months of playing, college basketball has determined the top teams for the Final Four and will determine this year's national champion this coming week. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info from every game through March Madness to the championship game. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, you name it, BetOnline.net has it. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all of your latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information needs, including live betting, your favorite Vegas casino games as well. So head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. You can find it all at BetOnline, where the game starts. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen every day. Pointing to the corner, and again, I got this right because I finally learned that if you point one way, it's opposite on the screen. So that Twitter account right there at SpokedZ, make sure you give it a follow, because Spoked is as good with Wild prospects as exists in the Wild Twitter sphere. So you'll have fun. I guarantee it. If you don't, definitely money back, but we'll have to. There'd be invoices and everything. So, you're going to have fun. So the Wild's farm system in general, a lot of good prospects, a lot of players, as you alluded to, that are very close to making the NHL roster. I just want to kind of undercover some of the other ones that people are not noticing or talking about yet. But before we get there, you did allude to it already, but is there a particular position in the Wild's farm system that is lacking in depth?
Honestly, not necessarily. If you're going to pinpoint it, you'd look at right wing, but even then, you got a lot of guys who are natural centers who, you're just not going to be a center here, and they're more than capable of playing on the wing there. But depends what you count. If you count Matt Boldy as a prospect still, he plays. I don't know I guess maybe he's on the left side in Minnesota. I can't remember who plays on the left and the right, but primarily before Minnesota anyways, he's a right winger. But from there you probably go Pavel Novak, who's having an incredible season. He's got some work to do before he's NHL ready, obviously, but I guess if you're gonna try to nitpick a position of need, quote unquote need, I don't even know if I don't even think need's the right word to use necessarily, but you look at the right side, even on defense too, you have Calen, Addison. Ryan O'Rourke's a left shot D, but he plays on the right side primarily. He's suspended right now. Whoops. And then from there, in terms of right shot defensemen, you got, the Johanssons, one of which is definitely not going to be here. But Simon Johansson's having a hell of a season right now, and he's signed for he just re-signed 1-year contract. I'm sure there's an out clause, but he's not going to come play in the NHL. But, you go from those two to like Kyle Masters, who's probably 4 years away. But he's my favorite sneaky undercover prospect to watch for sure. So if you're looking at the right side, I guess, if you want to nitpick, whether it's at forward or whether it's on the defense, if you want to use the word lacking, that's at least from quantity. Yeah, it's definitely the right side of defense and forwards for sure.
Obviously, in terms of the guys that are close to making it, you've got Rossi, Boldy's already up, but you got Calen Addison, you got Adam Beckman as well. All eyes have kind of shifted focus to Jesper Wallstedt as being the goalie of the future. Although if Marc-Andre Fleury and Cam Talbot play like they have been, they can stay as long as they like. Beyond that, in the system, like, what do we make of Zane McIntyre at this point? Is he somebody that could potentially elevate a little bit, or is Jesper Wallstedt kind of the diamond in the rough for this team at the goalie position?
I mean, McIntyre's old now too. I have a soft spot for Zane McIntyre, and he's been outstanding for Iowa. He's now their starting goaltender. He was drafted by Boston. He won goaltender of the year in college his senior year. He looked like he was going to have a nice long career, and it just never happened for him. He's been through a lot on the ice, off the ice. So, he's definitely a guy I root for. And he seems like he's enjoying his time with Iowa, even though they're getting peppered a lot of nights. Until recently, they were all playing pretty well. So, Wallstedt's the guy. I mean, he is. It's just that's where the conversation starts and ends, to be honest. And not just because there's no other guys in the system that are good or project to be NHL goaltenders. This kid is just, I mean, he's the best goaltending prospect in the world that hasn't played in the NHL yet. Like he is that dude. I've said it before. I think he's got, another year of development, and then he's going to be flirting with being NHL ready for sure. He's already playing pro in Sweden. So he's facing a lot of ex-NHL players, and players who could play in the NHL, but stay home in Sweden or just want to play in Europe. So he's playing against men. He's not playing in, the CHL where the oldest kid's 20, or college where the oldest kid's maybe 30. But he's fun to watch. Not necessarily like flashy or anything, but just especially for me coming from Boston, he plays the exact same way that Tuukka Rask plays. Just positionally sound, reading plays. He's just always in the right spot. So he's another one you could flip the top 3 prospects in the Minnesota Wild pool. You could flip Wallstedt, Rossi, and Boldy. I mean, you could make an argument for all 3 of those guys. Any of those 3 can be your number 1 prospect in the pool.
I also wanted to ask you, this completely slipped my mind, but Iowa made a couple of trades during the season, or the Wild did. And you got a couple of guys in Brandon Baddock and Nolan Stevens that were brought into the organization. How have those guys done? I mean, they bring some size from what I have seen, but have they been making an impact on the Wild roster, or have they been racking up the PIMs like pretty much everybody else?
Well, hold on, I gotta close the door again. Friggin' dog runs the show, dude.
It's his schedule.
Living at.
Yeah,
Seriously.
It's his schedule. I cannot abide by it, or not abide by it.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, for those 2, Brandon Baddock is just prototypical enforcer. He's just a pure fighter. He doesn't really give you anything else. So the fact that him and Cody McLeod are the same team right now, it's pretty funny. He's been running around trying to fight people, and there's a lot of guys who just won't go. He got in one recently and just pounded some dude that probably shouldn't have taken the fight, but I don't think Baddock gave him much of a choice there. I think that was more of an opportunity for the Hamburglar to go play. So that's what that trade was. And he actually went back in the NHL and he won his first game. So that was cool to see. But Nolan Stevens is interesting. I was curious because he's one of those guys. If Tim Army could make a hockey player in a laboratory, it would probably look like Nolan Stevens. He's a big body, plays really hard, but he's got good hands, good skill. He played at Northeastern for 4 years, produced all 4 years. He was really good. Drafted, I think, in the 5th round by St. Louis. And I mean, there was just no spot for him there, but he's a big power forward center. And he got hurt pretty early in. I mean, when he got to Iowa, he didn't really look super comfortable. But now he's playing fantastic. He's on the puck a lot. You can't knock him off the puck. He's going, whether it's down low or in front of the net, he's winning battles. And he's every once in a while he's chipping in with some points. I think he had like a 3-game point streak a couple weeks ago. But he's fitting in really well with a few different players. I like watching him play with Adam Beckman. He played with Firstov the other day, and I thought they linked up really well. I like Nolan Stevens. There are definitely tools there that you could use in the NHL. Will it be in Minnesota? I don't know. I probably have my doubts just because how deep the pool is and how many guys are in front of him in line. But he's a good player. He's got the tools, that's for sure. If he can stay healthy and he can kind of find that one next gear, you wonder about a team taking a flyer on a kid like Nolan Stevens, because I have a lot of time for him. I like him as a player.
Yeah. Final one for you. I'm just going to go through the 3 names that are most commonly associated with being part of the Wild roster next year. We are, because I refuse to acknowledge that the other option is even a possibility at this point. Kevin Fiala will be on this team next year. And send done. So assuming that, apologies, I get super passionate about that now. That's just my
gotta.
But assuming that, let's just play in or out with the big 3 for the Iowa Wild next year on this Wild roster. And let's start with Adam Beckman. Will he be on the Minnesota Wild roster next year, or is he going to be maybe one of those, if somebody gets hurt, then he gets elevated?
He's good enough to make an NHL team right now. I think everyone saw him in the preseason, obviously lost their mind. That was kind of, for me, that was more of a flash in the pan type thing. I'm not totally convinced he's ready to be a top 6 forward in the NHL yet. He's been put in a little bit of a different role for sure in Iowa. So whenever people ask about his production being down, it's not because he's not playing well. I think he's playing really well. And he's had to adjust. I mean, there are a lot of nights where, he's on a line with Cody McLeod or Brandon Baddock, and he's put in a grinding bottom 6 role. And I think at the beginning of the season, that was pretty tough for him, but he's definitely figured it out. If you know the kid, he's never had a bad day in his life. He's never going to pout. He's never going to be down about anything. He just wants to play. So that being said, I just don't see a spot for him next year, especially if Kevin Fiala is back. And there's just so many guys at that wing, whether it's on the right or the left, it's just, there's no real, you're not going to have him on your team as a 4th line left winger. It's just that you're not going to get Adam. You're not getting Adam Beckman. You're just getting a body at that point. So while he's definitely, shown the ability to play in the middle 6 or a bottom 6 role in Iowa, I think that was more not necessarily planning for his NHL future in terms of where he's going to project to be. I just think it was more rounding out his game and playing a little bit differently aside from just a pure sniper, because realistically the Wild, again, especially if they bring Kevin Fiala back, they're not really in need of some pure sniper. So I like the kid a lot. I think he's definitely going to be a very good NHL player, and when he does make it in a full-time role, definitely a top 6 wing for sure that can score. That shot is, his shot's ridiculous, but I just don't see a spot for him next year. You look at the top 6. I mean, you're not supplanting Kaprizov, Boldy at this point, not Zuccarello. So maybe, he's got to wait a little bit. Who knows if Zuccarello finishes out the contract in Minnesota? I have no idea. But, I think a lot of things would have to go right for Adam Beckman and probably wrong for a few other guys in Minnesota right now if he's going to find himself in that top 6 next season.
Calen Addison. We've seen a lot of moves made for this Wild decor. A lot of the players that are currently occupying those spots are all locked in for multiple seasons. And so that was my biggest question after the Goligoski extension was, what does that mean for Calen Addison? So Do you think he finds a way into the lineup? Obviously, if we're keeping Fiala, means somebody on D is probably going to be leaving. So is he in or out?
I mean, you just look at the bodies again. He's probably out at this point. I know it's after the trade deadline. They're already locking guys in, but it still is too early to know for sure.
Yep.
But, I guess it really depends what their off-season plans are with two guys in particular. Well, I guess three. Number one, Middleton. He's an RFA. As long as he finishes out the season and plays, I think he's got to play 11 more games. He'll remain as an RFA. Do they resign him or do they trade him for assets? Who knows? If you're giving up Kakinen, then you're probably hoping to keep him around a little bit. That probably depends on how he rounds out the rest of the year playing with Spurgeon. Number two is Kulikov. He's signed for another year I don't know why he gets kind of abused sometimes in the Twitter world. He's played pretty well. You'll want to look at just the eye test alone. Plus, if you look at the underlying numbers defensively, he's just been solid, and he was last year and the year before that. And he's locked in next season at a pretty reasonable cap hit. But if that's your third pair, you got a guy making, I think it's 2 point something there. Do you move that to try to recoup some assets or get a little bit of cap space? There are plenty of teams that'll come calling for him for sure. But that's a body that would have to probably leave if Calen Addison's going to play. And then you got to figure out what you're doing with Matt Dumba, especially if you're going to be keeping Kevin Fiala. I don't think they want to get rid of Dumba by any means. And along with that, I just don't think they would get a price that they're comfortable parting ways with him. But right now there's 7 definite NHL players on Minnesota's defense core. A lot of them are signed long-term. I still think Calen Addison has a few things he's got to figure out before he's ready to be more than just like a bottom pair fill-in guy in the NHL, especially if you want to put him in a top 4 D role. I'm not totally convinced he's there yet. There's still some immature parts of his game for sure. Some things he's got to round out. Namely the defensive side of the puck. Offensively, it's not a question. He's good. He's good to go. I think he's been a lot better lately for Iowa, or since his most recent, if you want to call it demotion, since they sent him back down. I think he's been a lot better. It was pretty up and down at the beginning of the year for the kid. There are a lot of nights that you kind of left like, what the hell was that? And there are some nights where you're like, yep, okay, get him to the NHL right now. Truth be told, he probably looked better in the NHL than he did with the AHL. And I don't really know if that's a red flag at all, but I don't think so. But, I'm not totally convinced he's just for sure ready yet to be full-time, 16, 17, 18 minutes a night in the NHL. I still think there's a few things that they probably want him to get right before he goes up. But again, the math just isn't good for him in terms of, not necessarily dollars, but for sure just the amount of guys that they have there, especially after re-signing Goligoski, which was interesting for sure.
Yeah, I'm right with you on that. And then the final one, Marco Rossi, who is standing by to give this team some a true center. I mean, right off the bat, that's something that definitely gives him value. However, you look at the Fiala line, Freddie Gaudreau playing pretty well as the center for that line. Hartman, maybe a guy that you shift back to a wing and you put Rossi up with those two. I don't know, but what do you think about Marco Rossi, in or out?
I mean, again, the math isn't good. Going line by line, I think if you take Hartman away from that line, you don't get the same Ryan Hartman. Like, you're not going to get the same. You're not getting what you're getting now if you put him in your bottom 6 in the wing, or even just wing in general. I don't think.
Yep.
Plus, there's no real winger spots for him to go to, anyways. On the second line, you have Gaudreau there for another year. I think he's obviously been pretty good with Fiala and Boldy on a lot of nights. But can you upgrade there for sure? And again, I actually really like Freddie Gaudreau. I think he lately has been taking some hits just because he's not Marco Rossi, or not like a out and out top 6 center, but it's working right now. Third line, you're not Eriksson Ek. Nope, you're not splitting those three up. And then, if you put him on the fourth line, what are you really going to get there? I don't know. I think lately for sure too, like, again, he was producing at an incredible clip, especially for a kid who went from OHL to not playing for a year with an extremely serious issue. But he, just like the rest of the team at Iowa, he looks exhausted. And the plays definitely come down a little bit. I don't know how much of that's on him. But the season's definitely wearing on him now. And it's not even a criticism because, again, this kid never played, or he didn't play hockey for a year, and then he's thrown right into the gauntlet in the AHL, which is a scary league to just get thrown into because you got a lot of guys down there who are just complete mutants. So, but he's been incredible. So, is he NHL ready? Yeah, he could go play in the NHL right now. Could he use another, a little bit just playing a pro game and getting used to playing against pros, against men, and playing in a pro league for sure. So, we'll see what happens. Again, there's so many more questions that they have in the offseason that they need to figure out before, you can definitively say any of those three are going to be in the NHL. But, he's a future number one center, future franchise cornerstone for sure. The kid, there's no question. He's an incredible player. He's one of the best prospects in the NHL. But, at this point, there's just so many questions in terms of the salary cap and how they're going to navigate that, trying to figure out who stays, who goes without messing with the chemistry, I guess. But, the math isn't good for him. So, like, all three of those guys, it's just the math sucks. So they got a lot of moves to make to try to, and they're not going to just do that just to get those guys in. Like, they got a good thing going right now, obviously. No one's really fallen off a cliff or anything like that. But even guys like Bugstad aren't in the lineup. Connor Dewar's back down the AHL. Like, there's just the numbers they hurt. So we'll see what happens in the offseason, who's going to go. But, at this point, especially in that top six, he's probably not there yet.
This was the depth that Anson Carter was talking about. So
yeah, that's exactly what he was talking about for sure.
100%. Well, that I think is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, make sure you're following Spoke Z on Twitter for
Nailed the point
this.
Again.
Yeah, all of this. You would think. I think this is somewhere in the episode 300s for me, and I finally now am starting to nail the opposite.
That was
side.
Good.
Yeah,
you're money right now, dude.
I know. Any talent agencies out there, if you're looking for a elite corner pointer on a laptop, I'm your guy.
That's your guy.
Absolutely. Make sure to follow Judd's Buds as part of the SodaPod feed for your weekly prospect podcast updates, as well as on Twitter for just general sickoness as well. Make sure you're following Locked On Wild wherever you listen to podcasts and following us on social media as well. We're keeping you as up to date as we can on Minnesota Wild everything. So if a puck drops, if news breaks, if Nick Delorier gets in a fight, Locked On Wild has you covered with new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.